Okay, so in this bit about inflation, obviously we all know this is a big issue, and because it touches everybody. It really does touch each and every one of us. Prices of things going up. Um, so it's very often discussed. Um, a lot of opinions out there about what causes inflation, and even how to measure inflation. When you think about it, it's a fairly complex thing. Lots of prices changing every day. Producers making different decisions about what to charge for their products. Retailers discounting and competing, whatever. So it's very difficult to get an overall impression. What's overall happening to prices? So we've looked at one attempt to do that. In chapter 4, we looked at our GDP deflator, and we calculated that by our nominal GDP over our real GDP. That was also an index to show us what the price level was relative to a base year. Well, there's a similar measure that you will hear a lot about, which is it's called the CPI. You've probably heard of it. CPI, Consumer Price Index. And that is, where the GDP deflator, it was talking about all goods and services produced in the society and how our prices affected overall. This is confining it to the things that you and I use in our household. So trying to get to an understanding of how costs are increasing for people within the society. How is our purchasing power declining? We measure that by finding out how much prices are going up. It doesn't matter if I make $1 today, and things are at this price level, and then I make $1 5 weeks from now and things are at this price level, the amount of stuff I can buy for each dollar that I earn goes down. That's what we call purchasing power. So inflation is the enemy of purchasing power. As the prices of the basic things that you need goes up, that eats into what you and I think of as disposable income. We have to work harder in order to be able to afford the stuff of life. So this is the effect of inflation, and as I said, it affects everyone. It tends to affect more, people as you go down the income scale. It tends to have a bigger effect because there are less options. The lower you go on the income scale, the less and less options you have. And, you probably heard the adage, it is very expensive to be poor. And when you spend 100% of your income just in order to be able to survive, inflation and prices going up forces you to make some choices. You've heard about the people who are making the choice between food and rent. So inflation does that. So our chapter discusses it, and we started by measuring the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Just because it has some advantages, like where the GDP deflator that we looked at before gives you the overall view of price levels. And that is useful. If you're taking a broader view of the economy, that might be a really good statistic to look at. But if you want to look at how inflation is affecting households, you want to hone it down a little bit. Now, it's not easy to do that either. But what they do is they take a basket of goods, so just some sort of a survey to determine what the average household, what the typical household in the society is using, and it takes all of those products and goes out and prices them in 1 year, the base year. Currently, it seems to be 2002 for Statistics Canada, the base year. So 2002, they priced all these things, and then they follow those prices through time. Follow those prices through time, so you can take the thing and you and you evaluate how much they cost now. You evaluate them in terms of how, so that's your numerator. Your denominator is what would they have cost in the base year. So one thing divided by the other, and you're going to get a value times 100. So it's going to be something like 120 or 102 or whatever, So at that level, we say that the price index, so let's say the thing that cost you $120 today cost you $100 in the base year. So you divide that out and you get 1.2. We multiply by 100 and you get 120. So the CPI, the price index in that year, is 120. Now, that's not the same as inflation. That just says that the thing that cost me $100 back in that base year now cost me 120. So it cost me 1.2 times, or 120% of what it cost at that time. And we do that year after year. We map the CPI. You can look at it. It looks like, if you've ever been to BC and looked at the mountains, look at the CPI. It's just roared up through the years. It says right in your book, the prices rise over time is something that economists take for granted. Prices rise over time. We continue to have rising prices, declining purchasing power for households. So that's how we measure the price index. The inflation rate is going to be taking the price index this year and subtracting, seeing how much it's changed since last year. So, I mean, if in our little example, the $100 thing and the base year was last year. So last year, this thing was $100. This year, it's $120. So the price index this year is 120. So 120% of the cost, but the inflation rate over that period is my 120 minus the 100 where I started, divided by the 100 where I started, in order to calculate that it has increased by 20%. So the inflation rate for that one period we're discussing would be 20%. And then, there are some variations on that, where they want to calculate the average over a number of years, the average inflation rate over a number of years. It's the same as calculating any other average. But just make that clear distinction in your mind between the CPI, the price index, and the inflation rate. The index is just a gauge of where the prices sit now relative to that base year. So it goes on and it talks about whether or not the CPI is accurate. And it's talking about, look, of course we try to make it as accurate as we can. And I have no doubt that these surveys are extensive, and they weigh very carefully what to put in the basket of goods and what to consider within the basket of goods. I'm sure there are allowances made and tweaks made over time, and calculations done to go back and calculate the effects of those changes. I'm sure it's all very scientific. But at the end of the day, this is a social science, and we're going to have to choose something. So they choose something. But there are always going to be problems with that. And right in your book, it discusses a few ways where we might be missing the mark. So it says there are four weaknesses of the CPI that are discussed. One is this substitution bias, which says when people people do make substitutions, like within their food budget. For example, if something is too expensive this week, we'll substitute something else. So if I don't know, chicken is too expensive, then we might substitute pork because it's on sale this week, or whatever. We're constantly making decisions. So obviously, a household is not fixed in that way. A household makes decisions and considers different things, substitutes. There is no way to adjust the statistic perfectly for this substitution bias, but it is worth mentioning that is a weakness of using a basket of goods and using it, because who is the typical family or household? I'm sorry, I don't mean to even use the term family. Who is the typical household? What is the typical household? And that even family composition or household composition changes over time too. So it's interesting that we do that. But as I said, I mean, this is the realm of statistics, mathematics, social science. You have to pick something. Another identified weakness of the CPI is this increasing quality bias. So what they're saying there is, sometimes prices rise of things because their quality is better. And there's no way to distinguish between the general rise in prices and the increase that is attributable to increases in quality. Now, I haven't really seen our system result in consistent increases in quality. I have definitely seen that you have to pay more in order to get any quality. I mean, look at the realm of umbrellas. Umbrellas are ridiculous. Some of them may as well have not even been made. You have to pay a lot in order to get a decent umbrella. Okay, a new product bias. So there are new things coming out all the time. They're not included in the basket. And so, we're not really adjusting for iPads if they're not around, or they didn't exist in the 2002 when the base year. So there's that. And then there's what they call outlet bias, which is what we talked about earlier, where consumers will make rational choices. And in fact, that's consistent with our economic theory. People will make choices that are in their best interest. You see the person in the grocery line who's pulling out their phone and they've got the price matching app, and they're comparing prices and whittling the food bill down. Hey, why not? Why not save as much as you can? So that outlet bias, people are using more discount stores and things, maybe not accounted for perfectly within the CPI. So those are some criticisms that we can make, and the book lays it on you. Last thing they discuss is the in this first part is the producer price index, which it's almost the same thing as the consumer price index, except we're talking there about things that producers need to buy. More, you're talking about, if you remember, in our circular flow diagram, we had factor markets and we had consumer markets, and you're basically looking at a price index that is based in that factor market. What businesses are needing to purchase, and what are those prices? So it is mentioned here that could be an early indicator of the consumer price index going up, and that would make sense to you. So if my price of raw materials starts to go up, I'm going to start to raise my prices. So if we as economists look and we see that the price of raw materials are going up, we might think to ourselves that pretty soon producers are going to start passing that on, and that'll come in the form of a rise in the CPI. And so those are the basic indexes, and we'll be right back with more.